not watering good ideas, just denying attention, affection, and presence, I'm going to challenge you to think through that carefully. There are times when that is the appropriate tool to use. And as an addiction specialist, Nick's nodding his head because he's thinking of a million times when that's the right thing to do. But when it comes to food stuff, food, body image, weight, these are different because it's not quite as external as grabbing a substance and putting it inside of me. It has to do with my self-image. It has to do with who I am. It's what I shop. It's what I wear. It's what I look like. And because that's so much more incarnate to the human, we end up with these body dysmorphic disorders where because you are shaming the human, because you are trying to solicit change with this aggressive and assertive or negligent and abusive sort of way, the verbal abuse, the hurtfulness, the combative words, the weaponizing of terms, you ultimately don't push them towards success. It has this ironic double negative effect where it backfires and they go back to coping the way they know how,
right? Which
apparently was abusive eating, right? And so if you're a parent out there and you're struggling with this in your own child's life, I tell you this. I had a person come in. He had a son who was like probably about 8 or 9. His son was overweight. And he was saying, I tell him not to eat this stuff. We tell him not to do this. And we tell him not to play the video games, but he still does it, or he, does nothing. And we take away the video games, we take away the food, and he just sits there and mopes. And I said, what are you replacing it with?
Yes.
And they were like, well, nothing. We're telling him not to do it. I'm like, okay, so meet them halfway, right? Because this is your child. So just pulling yourself away and being combative and offering only negative feedback is not as productive as coming in with educational alternatives and saying, hey, tonight, let's go out, let's go to the salad bar. Why don't we hit that together? Hey, I'm going to a nutritional seminar. I thought maybe you could come with me. Let's do this together. Like, let's replace bad ideas with good ideas, and then let's do it as a team. That's a very different form of parenting. That's coaching. That's running with them, not just punching them in the back of the head every time they're wrong.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I thought that was good. I don't really have anything else to add. I think you nailed it.
But it's a whole different way of how you train somebody, right?
Yeah.
And so I see the dad's motives in this, but Dad, if you're listening, you're wrong. You're wrong. What you're doing is causing permanent emotional damage. You are devastating your child. And the entire premise of your behavior is that you love your child and it's hard to watch them be unhealthy. And I get that. And as a father, I understand that frustration. But I'm going to tell you right now, what you're doing is backfiring. It is not causing results. It is not getting you closer. It's causing further damage. And that's going to only wound Crystal deeper. The right action is to make amends, to come together, and to try this conversation in a different way. And you know what? I got to tell you something. At the end of the day, if my child is abusing a drug or committing felonies, there's problems with that, and I may have to remove myself so that they can change because I don't want to enable them. But as a parent, you're one of the only people in your child's life that is supposed to give them unconditional love. And as a human, your psychology is dependent on somebody in your life loving you no matter what. Dad, there are plenty of men out there that are already shaming Crystal. She needs you to be the one man who doesn't. There's plenty of men out there that are making little jokes. There's plenty of women out there that are taking shots at her. There's plenty of websites and television shows and magazine articles that are constantly every day barraging her and reminding her that she's not good enough. You need to be the one person in her life who she can depend on to look at her and see his daughter and not the size of her waistline. And so dad to dad, I'm going to tell you right now, when you're raising a girl, when you're raising a child, that's your first job. If you're doing that, the rest we'll figure out together. But start with unconditional love.
Well, thanks for writing in, Crystal. Hope that helps.
Yeah, hang in there, girl. You're doing awesome.
All right, we're going to take a short break. When we come back, we are asked to weigh in on a family quarrel. This should be fun. You're listening to Pod Therapy. Hey, TheraPals, have you purchased your tickets to ScoopFest 2018? Our friends Matt, Paul, and Jacob are working really hard putting together their 3rd annual weekend-long comedy and podcast festival in beautiful Las Vegas, Nevada. October 12th, 13th, and 14th.
When is that again, Nick?
October 12th, 13th, and 14th, unless you want to purchase the VIP, which is on the 11th, which Jim and I will be there. This is going to be awesome.
The VIP package is going to be nuts.
Yep. Tournament of Kings. It's going to be awesome. So enjoy live comedy, variety shows, the Scoop Talent Show, the Jock versus Nerd Costume Ball, which I know...
it's going to be awesome.
Yeah, I can't wait to see Jim's outfit.
Oh, yeah.
And much, much more, including live recordings of Matt Mattingly's Ice Cream Social, Pod Therapy, Penn Sunday School, and a whole bunch of other really awesome podcasts. And guess what? Our listeners get $40 off the ticket price.
What? That's awesome.
Right. So go to heyscoops.com/therapy, and that will be the discount. So please check that out. heyscoops.com/therapy. Yes.
We're back. You're listening to Pod Therapy, and our next listener writes in about diseases versus mental illness.
Hey guys, so it's a divided household over here on whether addiction is a disease or a mental illness. Also, curious on your thoughts about intimacy anorexia. Thanks.
Okay, this is a good one because this person wrote in because I saw a debate she was having on Facebook, and she's a fan of the show, and so we saw her thread, and she had this whole debate going on Facebook where two different sides were weighing in, debating about whether or not addiction is a disease. And I commented and said, if you want Nick and I to talk about this, we're totally willing to. And she was like, hell yes. And so she turned this into a question. She added the intimacy anorexia, but Nick, we have heard this question a million times, and it's not an easy answer, but there is an answer to this.
Disease.
It's a disease.
As certain as climate change and evolution by natural selection.
Okay, wow. So
if you're into science,
stand.
It's disease.
So, but
here's the other thing, though, too.
Right? Because it's unlike other diseases, right?
Well,
because
right.
If you have leukemia, right, that happened to you. We all pity you. Whenever you're addicted to heroin and you're destroying your life, there's a part of me as a human that wants to notice the part of the equation you play in this, right?
Well, sure.
Okay, so
but
help
that
us
doesn't
understand,
necessarily not make it a disease.
Help us understand why it's still a disease.
Okay. Well, first, I want to get just kind of a brief explanation of kind of the dopamine process and everything, how that works.
Okay.
So
dopamine
just really quick. So dopamine is a neurotransmitter. It's the thing, when we experience pleasure, that's what we're experiencing. We're experiencing a rush of dopamine. Our brain has to be able to communicate to us that certain things that we do for survival are good and we should do those more.
Like having sex is pleasurable. Yes. Nature wants us to do that.
Yes.
So it rewards it.
So it's almost kind of like our brain is training us like we would train a dog.
Okay.
Oh, you did something I really like.
Here's
a treat.
Okay.
Do more of that.
Okay.
Eating is the same way.
Yeah.
If I go hiking, I get that rush of endorphins. I get a little bit of a dopamine rush, right? So it's exercise. It's something really good.
The body wants you to do it
how
again.
How does the brain know, or how do I know that eating food I need to do for survival, hiking I don't need to do for survival?
Okay.
Yet they're both reinforced with dopamine. Well, I know that based off of the level of dopamine. I get more dopamine from eating food, less from hiking.
Which is why sex is exciting, and we talk about it as orgasm and explosive and euphoric, is because it's pouring dopamine in your brain. Because it's yes, do that again.
Yes,
so the species will survive.
Species can survive. Yes. Okay. So if I go 2 days without hiking and 2 days without eating food, which am I going to crave?
Right.
I will crave the one that gave me the greater amount of dopamine. Okay. So this whole system is beautifully set up for survival. Now, when we throw in drugs and alcohol or psychoactive substance, what it's actually doing is it's artificially kind of hijacking this part of the brain, mostly in the limbic system. And what it does is it mimics that same effect. So it's a substance that comes in from the outside that gives us that same result, but it's not like the rush you get from food. It's way higher.
Right.
It reinforces it at a much, much higher level.
You hacked the system.
Yes. You found a way to hack the system.
Broke the ATM, and now it's spitting out $100 bills.
Right, which is why when we worked at the rehab facility, we were getting people in there who hadn't eaten in days, sometimes even weeks.
Right.
And we're like, how in the hell can they do this? Because if given the choice between their drug of choice or food, they're going to choose the drug because that's the kind of craving. So when we have somebody who is craving a substance that they haven't used in a long time, I got somebody who's been using heroin and they haven't used in a few days, and they're craving it, it's not like the way I crave Dunkin' Donuts.
Right.
It's something way more intense.
It's almost unimaginable. If you've not been a drug addict, if you've not had that, it's almost unimaginable to imagine what it's like. The closest thing I remember in a lecture once, I heard a great speaker saying, did you realize that each of us is chemically dependent right now? And if I withdraw you from your chemical long enough, you will go through withdrawal symptoms. And we were like, what are you talking about? And he was like, you're chemically dependent on a substance called H2O, dihydrogen monoxide, right? Water. And he was saying withdrawal symptoms of water include dry mouth, dry throat, confusion, irritability, sleepiness, death.
Yeah.
And, he was going through all the different things. He's saying, if I cause you to have great thirst, you would kill a man to get a bottle of water. It will come down to that because your body so craves it and you are so delusional, you need it because your brain goes into survival mode. And I guess, Nick, that's kind of what I hear you saying is the addiction disease concept emerges because the brain enters into an autopilot kind of mode where it craves and seeks in an almost primitive reptilian kind of way.
Right. And so where the disease concept comes into play then is the fundamental changes in the brain that occur once the person becomes addicted to it. Okay. So there's actual changes that do occur within the structure of the brain in this rewards pathway in the limbic system. Okay. So receptors, dopamine receptors in the neurons kind of start to turn off.
Right.
Right. So now all of a sudden you have to use more and more and you're not getting that same effect.
Right.
Right.
And that causes that loop where it starts to get
Yes.
You started with smoking a joint, but now you need a lot. Or you started with a beer, and now you need whiskey. Or you started with smoking heroin or taking pills, and now you're shooting heroin.
Right.
It's more concentrated.
So now let's look at the other part of this too, which is the genetic part, which people are going to like, genetic? What are you talking about? This is a behavior. You've chosen to do this. Yes and no. So there is a genetic component. So interesting study that was done with alcohol several decades ago. They were looking at children, the biological children of alcoholics were 4 times as likely as the general population to develop alcoholism later in life.
Yeah.
Okay, but that doesn't tell us anything. That doesn't tell us if that's nature or nurture.
Yeah.
Where we really got the information was looking at adoption studies. So the biological children of alcoholics who were adopted out and raised by non-alcoholics were still 4 times as likely as the general population to develop alcoholism.
Wow.
So we learn that there's a genetic component that's involved. So part of that we believe is the number of dopamine receptors on the neurons.
Okay. But again, it's like, and this is what I hear you saying in that, because I remember this on her debate. People were saying there's a genetic link, and people were like, dude, that's a cop-out. And I think that it comes down to this. There's a genetic predisposition, right?
Right.
So like I might be genetically predisposed to lung cancer, but if I never start smoking cigarettes, I do not increase my likelihood to get that.
All right. So here's my cup example. So let's say Jim has a cup in front of him. It's a red Solo cup.
Yeah.
And I've got a cup in front of me, and mine is a shot glass.
Okay.
Okay. The cups represent our genetics.
Okay.
When the cup overflows, that represents addiction.
Okay.
So you and I, let's say we graduate high school, we go to college together, and we're going to start pouring water into this cup.
Right.
And we drink the same amount, we drink the same substances, we drink the same times, and we're pouring at the same rate.
Right.
Which one of our cups is going to overflow first?
The shot glass.
Mine.
Yeah.
Okay, so that is the genetic predisposition to alcoholism. I'm starting off with a smaller cup.
Right.
So if Jim has no history of alcoholism, can he become an alcoholic? Absolutely.
Right. But
he's just going to have to work at it.
So it's a disease we can all get. We're predisposed to it at different
diabetes,
levels. Right.
All of that. All of that has a factor. Part of that factor is your lifestyle.
Right.
The choices. Just because I choose to eat Big Macs every day and all that, that doesn't mean that if I get heart disease, that it's not a disease because I made choices.
Good point. Yeah. And you could be predisposed to it. And another thing, too, to step into this question. So the first thing is this. When people ask us, is this a disease? Is it a choice? And her question was, is it a disease or a mental illness?
That's the part I didn't really quite understand.
I think I still knew what she was saying. She was asking, is it a choice or is it another thing, right? And it's because to us, disease and mental illness are the same concept, just different words.
My answer to that is yes.
Yes, yeah, this is both. But here's another way I've heard it phrased, and I want to back this up. I've heard it phrased, addiction is a disease of choice. In the same way that diabetes is often a disease of choice. It isn't always. There's juvenile diabetes. In the same way that lung cancer can be a disease of choice. In the same way that heart cancer can be. In the same way that an STD, a sexually transmitted disease, is a disease of choice. Like, you probably went and put yourself in positions where you could get that. But what's interesting about addiction, we go back to that shot glass metaphor. Most Americans have drank, right?